When you play the Game of Thrones, you
Subscribe and like.
or you die. There is no middle ground.
Alright, hello YouTube, and welcome back to the Grease Comms YouTube channel. Today's video, we're going to be doing a review and breaking down episode 2 of House of the Dragon. And right away, first impressions, much better than episode 1. I think they really built upon a lot of the things that I didn't like about episode 1. There were very few. I really liked episode 1, but I think episode 2 did a great job of giving us more character interactions, developing some of the characters that I think were underdeveloped in episode 1, and a lot of other things that I really liked in this episode. But before we get into the episode review, if you guys like to subscribe, like, and comment, please do. It helps channel reach people that might like this content as well. We're going to be doing House of the Dragon episode reviews all the way through the season, as well as doing live streams directly after the episodes drop. So, let's get into the review. And the first thing I want to talk about. So episode 1, one of my big complaints was we didn't get enough of Corlys Velaryon and Rhaenys. Now, I still think in this episode we didn't get a lot of Rhaenys. You know, we had one real main scene with Rhaenys and then Rhaenyra, and then she was kind of just there in other conversations, but yeah. Corlys was very much a big character in this episode. We get a lot of him. We get a lot more of his kind of motivations, what drives him, and a little bit more of his backstory, which I was really appreciating that they took the time to kind of fully develop his character. Because this episode, yes, you could kind of look at it as being almost a filler episode, but what this episode did was it built up our characters, right? So last episode, we had a lot of Daemon building. We had a lot of his character growth and development and understanding kind of who he is. And then this episode, it's like, okay, we don't need Daemon as much, but so we're going to focus on a lot of other characters. Rhaenyra, we're going to focus on Alicent, we're going to focus on Otto, we're going to focus on Corlys. So we focus on a lot of these other characters that maybe didn't get as much screen time as a character like Daemon did last episode, and we build them up a bit more, which I really liked in this episode. Now, other things, and I think the standout scene of the episode for me, I think there's probably two. I think my first favorite scene was the scene with Rhaenys and Rhaenyra, and Rhaenys being kind of the person to kind of wake up Rhaenyra a bit. And someone in my live chat mentioned this kind of comparison of the Hound and Sansa, where the Hound is the one kind of telling Sansa what the world really is and kind of trying to be straight with her, while everyone else is kind of dancing around it and lying to her. So we have this conversation with Rhaenys and Rhaenyra, where Rhaenys is telling her, you know, Rhaenyra, you may be the heir now, but these people are not going to set up for it. Your father's going to have to remarry, and once your father remarries, as soon as he has a boy, you're going to be out. Right? That's more or less what she's telling her. And I think it's a really great conversation because it sets the tone for the rest of the episode with how Viserys is going to have to remarry and how Rhaenyra is going to deal with that. Because Rhaenyra, to me, this is Rhaenyra's episode. Rhaenyra is a character that you feel for her because she feels kind of like she has no one to talk to. Like, she feels like she has her father, but her father is always busy, or her father doesn't know how to talk to her. And that leads us to Alicent, where Alicent is this character that is supposed to be best friends with Rhaenyra. And you know that Alicent does care for Rhaenyra to a certain degree, but Rhaenyra definitely puts what her father wants and her own needs above Rhaenyra. As we see with, I think one of the other better scenes in the entire episode is Rhaenyra and Alicent in the Sept. And you can see that Alicent is trying to help Rhaenyra with her grief. And this is really the only time we really see Rhaenyra open up to anyone about kind of the things she's dealing with. Because this is about a six-month gap in between episode 1 and episode 2. And Rhaenyra is still very much feeling the effects of her mother's death. And still very much is grieving for her. And she kind of lets herself kind of have this moment where she can grieve with Alicent. And Alicent's kind of the perfect character for Rhaenyra to do this to because Alicent's kind of been through it before. And I think the heartbreaking moment here is that we know that Alicent is really kind of manipulating Rhaenyra at the same time. Right? Alicent kind of slips in that line that maybe you should be the one to go to Viserys. And I think this comes out of a place of well-being for Rhaenyra from Alicent's point of view, but also this is what Viserys wants, right? And it's almost kind of hinted at it of like, oh, can, you know, help me out here, you know, Alicent from Viserys to help get Rhaenyra to be able to have this conversation. And I think it's heartbreaking how the ending starts. So I guess we'll kind of pick up on Rhaenyra and Alicent's relationship throughout this episode. Kind of how I did it in the live stream as well, where I talk about a lot of characters and their interactions with characters. But Rhaenyra and Alicent's relationship is very tragic because when we come to the end of the episode, and I think me and the chat as well had some issues with it just kind of being out of nowhere that Viserys chooses Alicent. Like, it's not out of nowhere, right? You have the build-up scenes, but there's no conversations, right? There's no conversation with Viserys and Otto that this is what's going to happen, or it makes even more sense with Viserys and Corlys Velaryon, with how important Corlys is to almost embarrass and shame him publicly to the council. To me, it was a bit interesting. But talking about the scene individually, right? Alicent becoming really Rhaenyra's like stepmom. Out of nowhere, Alicent really doesn't tell Rhaenyra that this is going to happen, that this is what's kind of been in the works. Rhaenyra feels betrayed. And something that I think I talked about in the live stream as well is that this show is doing a great job of showing, not telling. Rhaenyra doesn't say any words, but you can feel the pain that Rhaenyra is going through. Not only is she struggling right now with her position, trying to learn and to be a better queen, but also dealing with the idea of Rhaenyra's mom just died, and you can tell that they were very close, and her father's already having to remarry and struggling with that whole idea. And then also the idea that Rhaenyra's position isn't really safe either, right? So there's a lot going on with Rhaenyra when she's only 15. You have to remember she's only 15 at this point. To then have her best friend, and it almost feels like the only person that she was able to talk to backstab her, right? It's a tough way for Rhaenyra's character to end out at the end of episode 2. But that's kind of what her arc was about in the first 2 episodes, was showing how Rhaenyra feels very alone for the most part. If you look at Daemon, who seems like he was a caring uncle, he's no longer there for Rhaenyra, someone that I think Rhaenyra was able to talk to in those situations. Her best friend now has kind of betrayed her. So I think that is one of the highlights of this episode, and I really liked that idea of it. Now, my next probably favorite scene outside of the Sept scene and also Rhaenyra's scene at the end, and also I think Rhaenyra just had a lot of great scenes in this episode, but Rhaenyra and Rhaenys, again, I think was also really good. Rhaenyra and Daemon and everything that happens in Dragonstone, I think this was the most beautifully shot part of the episode. I think it's the best like cinematography we've seen from the episode so far, or the episodes in general. I think out of all of the shots from Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon, I think this is one of my favorites, where we just have everything with Dragonstone, with whether that be with Caraxes or Rhaenyra showing up. I really loved the way that whole thing was done. And this is our only we see 2 real scenes with Daemon, and this is one of them. Actually, we see about 3. We see about 3 scenes of Daemon, and it continues to kind of build his character as kind of the bad boy, kind of an asshole type guy, but he has more stuff kind of going on in his own head, and things that we don't, or I guess the public doesn't see for the most part. And Daemon's kind of plot ends out where he's going to be going to the Stepstones and trying to kind of gain some respect for his name. Similar to where, if we see with Aenys the First's reign with Maegor, where Maegor, because of the king's inaction, was the one getting all the glory and all the respect, and all these people started to like him because he was the one solving the issues in the kingdoms. The Stepstones is a very big idea right now, and for the idea that the crown's not really backing them at all, no one's really helping them. It's going to be something that is going to gain Daemon a lot of respect, and we'll see that as the episodes continue to go on. Talking about Daemon, we'll get to his partner in crime, Corlys Velaryon. Corlys was a character that we didn't see much in episode 1, but episode 2, we kind of see the Velaryon power. They're the richest house in the entire show right now, which is very different from a Game of Thrones where it was the Tyrells and the Lannisters. The Velaryons not only are the richest house, they have half of basically the fleet in Westeros. They're a very important house. And they also have Targaryen blood in them. They are Valyrian. They really should be the closest allies to the crown. And we see that this could have happened, right? If Viserys was to marry Lena, that would have been the perfect marriage. In the idea of political terms, it would have been a great marriage. Now, in terms of other factors, not a good marriage. It's the same thing we're going to see with kind of Rhaenyra in probably next week's episode, but it's a marriage that it's like right situation, but wrong time, right? If Viserys' wife had died, say 5 years, not even 5, 3 or 4 years later, you would have had Laena being 15, 16, 17, that range where it makes more sense, kind of Alicent's age. But when you have this girl that's only 12 years old, she looks younger than 12, being the person that's going to become queen to a man that's very much, I think he's in his 30s or maybe 40s at this point, that isn't really looking for that, right? It's a difficult situation, and to me, it's something that I think Viserys makes a very human choice with choosing Alicent, something that I think a lot of other people would have done. It's either, very beautiful, and the thing with Alicent is, Alicent's not a bad choice, right, for becoming queen. It gets the High Towers with you, but the thing is, you already kind of have the High Towers, and they have so much power as it is, right? So I don't think marrying Alicent does much for you politically, really, and it actually damages you because the Velaryons, again, are basically publicly insulted once again, and that kind of makes you an enemy, right? And that's something we see in the conversation when we're kind of debating on who Viserys should marry and whether or not he should have married Laena. So that's kind of, course, Velaryon's doing a lot of this episode where he's kind of making deals that make sense, and he's trying to upgrade his family's power and all of that. We see that that's a lot of his big motivations, and also this whole problem in the Stepstones is causing the Velaryons a lot of issues, right? They are going to lose a lot of their trade routes if that was to be sealed against them. And it makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of human interactions and a lot of things that make logical sense from a lot of characters' point of views. Even if we look at why Viserys doesn't openly want to go into war, it's because he fears that Essos and all of the kind of companies over there, the free cities, are going to go against them if they do this. And that makes sense from a logical point of view. The Targaryens at this point, they have a lot of dragons that just don't have a lot of Targaryens. If you look at the available Targaryens right now, you have Viserys, Daemon, Rhaenyra, and then you kind of have some of the Velaryons that have Targaryen blood, and that's it. So there's a lot of issues right now with succession, and a lot of people would see the Targaryens as being very weak at the moment, and this would be the time to strike. So that makes a lot of sense, and that's a good way to lead into episode 3. Something else I want to talk about in this episode that I thought was kind of meh. The intro for House of the Dragon, I really am not a fan. I think it has a very underwhelming intro. I think them keeping the music from Game of Thrones, basically, I just didn't like that idea. I thought they were maybe going to go a different route, but I understand why they did it. Just wasn't a huge fan of that entire idea. We also can see that Otto Hightower is continuing to gain power. He's very much the Tywin Lannister type character of the show. He already kind of has full control over Viserys, it almost feels like, and he's manipulating events like Alicent becoming queen kind of in the shadows, right? Where it doesn't feel like, from an outsider's point of view, it doesn't feel like Otto's doing anything really to get Alicent to be the queen outside of Alicent just being beautiful. But if we look at the events that's going on and how that ends up coming to pass, Otto definitely knew what he was doing in that situation. One of my favorite parts of this episode is the way Rhaenyra handles Daemon and kind of just spits in Otto's face like, yeah, I may be 15, but I'm still a badass and I can handle things on my own. So, yeah, I love Rhaenyra. She definitely is my favorite character. I'm going to have a bias for her throughout the entire show. I think she's just awesome. I think she's an awesome character. And the journey her character is going to go on, I think, is just amazing to me. But looking at all those ideas, I think episode 2 is really great. I think episode 2 brought us back to a lot of what Game of Thrones was. We have multiple council meetings in this episode. We have a lot of character interactions and building off of their, I guess, arcs in episode 1 and who they were in episode 1. I really enjoyed the way that they handled Rhaenyra, Alicent, and a lot of our main characters in this episode. So that is a lot of what I wanted to talk about. If you guys wanted to see more of my bigger analysis of the episode, I would look at my live stream I did on Sunday. But yeah, thank you guys all for watching. We'll probably do a preview, kind of my predictions for episode 3 on Friday or Saturday. And I'll see you guys all then. Bye, guys.
If you think this has a happy ending, you haven't been paying attention.